Greetings, I'm Dr. Max Gomez at the Fifth International Vatican Conference, and I'm joined today by Dr. Rebekah Gilead, the CEO of LSU Health, and also the former secretary of the Department of Health in Louisiana. Welcome, Dr. Gilead. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So it seems that your background and your present position really puts you in a kind of a unique position to tackle some of these problems that we've been talking about when it comes to drug pricing in particular. And it seems that Louisiana, you decided to go after hepatitis C. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think a lot of people don't realize what a huge problem that is.
Sure, Max, and I'm an obstetrician gynecologist, and my background is in women's health. So hepatitis C is an issue that found me, but find me it did. And when I started my role as health secretary, a job that was very encompassing. It was disability services, Medicaid, aging and adult services, disaster response and preparedness, public health. I realized that one of the main challenges in Louisiana was hepatitis C. At the time, of course, this was before COVID, hepatitis C was the leading infectious disease killer in the United States. And I led the health department. And shortly after taking on that role, I received letters, both from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is the group that oversees the two largest health programs in the United States, Medicare and Medicaid, saying you're not providing enough hepatitis C drug. In 2013, there was a breakthrough drug that came out that was able to cure hepatitis C. It was one of the first curable viruses. And so it was really unacceptable that here we had a cure and CMS thought we weren't treating enough people. I also got a letter from advocates saying, Dr. Gee, your health department isn't treating enough people. So I started to look into it. Why weren't we treating enough people? And I found that we weren't. I found that we were only treating about 200 people. And the question was why? Well, I looked at the history and it turned out the price was why. The price was over $80,000 a person. The governor and I had inherited over a $2 billion budget deficit. There were things on the chopping block like major cuts to higher education, major cuts to Medicaid. And at an $80,000 price tag with thousands of people known to have this illness, treating it seemed out of reach. And so that's why I started my journey in 2016 to try to find a solution for how could a low-income state, Louisiana, one of the 3 lowest income states in the United States, afford to do the right thing, which is to make sure that everyone living in Louisiana with hepatitis C could have access to this remarkable new therapy.
One of the lowest income states, you've got a big budget deficit and a huge need dollar-wise and patient-wise. How do you balance that, or how did you go about trying to make all of this happen and fix this seemingly insurmountable problem?
Well, it did seem insurmountable, Max, and certainly there were others who tried to take on pharmaceutical pricing. California, for example, had a bill to try to get the same price for Medicaid that was paid for the VA pharmaceuticals, and the pharma industry spent $100 million to defeat that bill. So certainly anything that would potentially threaten the pharmaceutical pricing model was seemingly doomed to fail. And so what did I do? Well, I started off making the case for why the current system wouldn't work for Louisiana. And I reached out to Peter Bach. Peter and I had been on a National Academy of Medicine panel on making pharmaceuticals affordable. And he works at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And in his lab, they put together an abacus that showed the trade-offs of a state budget. In the US, the federal government can borrow money from China or print money. The states can't. We have a zero-sum game. We have to spend only what we have every year. And if we run out, we have to cut services. So we showed that this was what the state had to spend. This is what it would cost to treat hepatitis C, the goal that I had. We found it would be almost $760 million. That price tag is more than the state of Louisiana spends on K through 12 education, incarceral populations, the Veterans Administration, and some of the roads safety issues combined. So clearly out of reach. But we showed in this ad because what the trade-offs would be. What will we have to trade off? Because there was this thought of, well, look, it's a good value. It is an effective treatment. And so what's the problem? So we started off by demonstrating the problem. The governor and I also reached out to drug companies making the direct acting antivirals that cure hepatitis C. And we were not able to negotiate better pricing. We were told, no, it's a great value. There is no problem. Even people at the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, said, look, this is a great deal. What's your problem? Despite the fact that we showed we couldn't afford it and that the trade-offs would be unacceptable. So one day I happened to be talking to Josh Sharfstein. He was the former FDA Principal Deputy Commissioner and now is at Johns Hopkins University. And I presented the problem to him. And he proposed that we consider using a 1910 federal patent law called 1498 that allows the US to appropriate intellectual property when it's in the best interest of the safety or security of our citizens. A good example of the use of that law is night vision goggles, which are used for our military, the folks who serve in the military. And he proposed that we have a conference to discuss this solution about whether this solution could help us obtain affordable drugs. And to explore the idea further, policy experts were convened. There was a several-day conference at Hopkins. There was public input. Over 100 positive comments came in saying that this was a great idea. We ought to think about this because hepatitis C was so debilitating. However, as you can imagine, the pharmaceutical industry was not impressed by this idea. It threatened some of their economic models, and they said, this is a no-go, we don't accept it. And so what I then said was, well, what then? Because people are dying in Louisiana. I will not accept that they will die because I can't afford it in the wealthiest nation on earth. This is a human rights problem. It's unacceptable, and we will fix it. So you tell me how to fix it. So then we went on the next part of our journey.
So you were able to strike a deal with Gilead, but it sounds like this federal patent law that you mentioned was kind of the big stick that you could hold over their heads as the nuclear option, as it were, if they don't come to the table and negotiate?
That certainly was. No, the Gilead deal, no, this is only 1 year into this. This took us 3 years. So at this point, what happened is we started to renegotiate. I think certainly the 1498 was a nuclear option that woke the pharmaceutical industry up, as there was broad public support for this. And we started to talk to them again. By this point, there was a more competitive market. Initially, only one company, Gilead, was in the market, but AbbVie and Merck had joined in. And so having a competitive market started to unstick some of these discussions. And we released a request for information on what, by that point, we had come to as our proposed solution, which was a subscription model. We got support from Senator Bill Cassidy, one of our US senators, who is a liver disease specialist. And with Governor Edwards' endorsement, I asked the National Governors Association if they would be interested in convening other states to discuss policy solutions. We felt that it would be helpful to have an offensive line, as we say in football, to have other states go with us to work on this change. We didn't have the money to do it, though. But I have someone I call my fairy godfather, who's John Arnold, and he had read an article in the Washington Post and cold called me one day out of the blue and said, Rebekah, this is really compelling, what you're trying to do, and I want to help you. How can I help you? And I said, John, this is just incredible timing. What if you helped fund this effort at the NGA? And he did, and continued to support. The John and Laura Arnold Foundation was a tremendous asset to us as we continued this journey, because we did not have any agreement at that point. But we brought together 10 states. We brought together governors. We brought together the pharmaceutical industry. We brought together payers and said, look, let's rewrite this equation. You don't like 1498? You may not like their subscription model idea, but tell us what would work. Out of this exercise with NGA came a wonderful set of recommendations, a menu let's say, of recommendations for how could we move forward on pricing. We also worked with CMS during this time as Louisiana was pursuing this subscription model to say, will you support this idea of a subscription model? How can we work with you? And so we had phenomenal partnership also with the Trump administration, who was working with us to make sure that we could have a viable option at the end of all of this. So we got close to having this model working, and we're able to strike a deal with Gilead eventually.
That's fabulous. We're out of time, but I really have to ask you then, it sounds like you touched on the issue of, is this something then that you feel is scalable and applicable, say, to other huge public health problems, particularly when it comes to drug pricing?
Yes, and what we were able to do is to get a model that works not only for Medicaid, but for individuals who are incarcerated, to make sure that they all get access. And over the course of the first year, we didn't treat 250. Like my first year as secretary, we've treated over 7,000. So it's working. And certainly this model could work for anything like vaccines, which in some ways the COVID vaccine process has been a subscription model variant. It could work for other expensive therapies. It could work for incarceral populations, and it could work for Medicare more broadly. So we think this is a really exciting model that has already saved lives in Louisiana, but could be a game changer for other diseases and conditions. And I think what I learned from this was that if you work with industry, if you reset the problem, not as a us versus them issue, but here's the challenge, help us solve it. We need to do better for our people, that you can gain traction, you can overcome seemingly insurmountable barriers, and you can succeed. So this has been an incredibly rewarding journey, and one that has been very beneficial to many, many people in Louisiana.
Dr. Rebekah Gee, thank you for your insight, and especially for this new approach that really seems to provide a solution for what has been heretofore an intractable problem. Thank you for your time and your efforts. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Max.